Good morning, afternoon, evening. I don't know. We're not that many. We're only 12, so that gives us a nice and cozy half hour for me to share with you a few thoughts on effectively how to build a staff team of non-tech professionals in a tech company. Allow me to share my screen. Um, I do let me know if you can't see it. Um, Trying to switch to presentation mode here. There we are. Okay, very well. So maybe short introduction. I'm Carla. I started working for Materialize in 2003. That's almost 2 decades ago. That also has um, given me a possibility in my career to really start a team from scratch. When I joined in 2003, I was the first in-house counsel for Materialize. There were no legal people at the company working at that time. In the meantime, there is a department. There is a group of people that, and together we can call them a department. And there is, I think, um, a high degree of similarity, whether you are a member of a legal team in a company or a member of the finance team, the HR team, the IT team, or the marketing team. I think that there is a few common denominators that you can draw and you can see in how you do your work, the challenges that you face in doing it, and from the management perspective, from those who lead such teams, there is, I think, a few topics, a few thoughts that I can share with you based on my very own personal experience, because that is really what this talk is all about. There is no underlying big scientific principles. I have studied law and only law at university, so there is no additional scientific insights that I will be sharing. This is all work-based experience. Key points that I want to talk about today are the following ones. I think that if you talk about and think about a team in a company, and especially when that team is a staff team, that you have to think about it from an angle that the team is more than the people. I'll go and I explain that. A second big thing is that there is a lot of ignorance that the members of your team are going to have on all of the things that are ongoing in on the business side, because the business inherently is driven by certain technology, and it will be more frequent than not that your team members are not highly acquainted with or educated in the topic of the technology. I think that in hiring people and in keeping them on board, it is very important to look for and stimulate curiosity, and at the same time also to encourage your team members to build a network that goes far beyond and above the limitations of the group of professionals that are working on the staff specialization. So the lawyers in the company should know many more people outside of the legal team than within the legal team, because that is ultimately what is going to help them to do a better job. A staff role, whether it's in legal or in finance or in HR, is always about finding balances, because there is some intrinsic contradiction in the things that we have to do. I'll talk about that a bit. And then another thing is the mantra that I continuously apply when I'm doing my job, when I'm coaching the members of my team, is that we're all in sales. There is no such thing as people who are blocking sales, because we're all in sales. Any people's salary is paid from the turnover we generate on the basis of the sales that we do. So all of us are aligned and all of us are motivated by ultimately the same thing, and that is that we're all in sales. The last thing that I want to talk about is the importance of making sure that as a team manager, you dedicate sufficient attention to working on the career path of your team members, and how, from a staff department, that sometimes is difficult. First of all, talking about the legal team at Materialize, there's my team members. are 5 business support lawyers, 2 IP officers, and 2 paralegal, 2 persons who fulfill a paralegal role. Now, I think it's very important when I think about resources available that I do not only think about the people in my group, because there is 2 additional sources of the work to being done, and that is on the one hand tools that we have available, software tools that we have available. On the other hand, there is of course the help of external counsel and your legal force in a company, but also for other staff units. I think this is true. The force of your department is more than the sum of the individuals that are a member of your department. You also need to think about if there is an overload of work and I need to increase the resources that I have available. Should I necessarily think about expanding the team, or could I think of maybe looking at automation of certain processes? Would it not be wiser, instead of hiring yet another paralegal to review confidentiality agreements, would it not be wiser to look at how can we automate or make more efficient, make less time intensive the process of reviewing confidentiality agreements? So within Materialize, what we have is we have certain tools available and we're far away from being ready, but there is tools that support us in keeping a repository of all of the contracts. There is a tool, and it has been externally bought. There is a tool that helps us in management of all of the stock options plans and the warrant plans that we have, because keeping track of that on the basis of a simple Excel sheet at a certain point in time, we saw that that was simply not sufficient, and that in order to adjust our way of working, it was much better to pay a license fee to a company that has solutions in place for this part of our job. On we as a listed company, we're listed on Nasdaq. There is certain SEC reporting that we have to do. Also there, when first off we start with simply in a Word document write what we had to write and include in our report. We soon found that there was technical solutions available, and those are not very fancy ones, that helped us in simply reducing the hours of work that we had to put in there by identifying and really making very clear which sections required annual updating, number sections, or simply also legal aspects that needed to be updated. And these are all examples of how you can, to some extent, work on management of your resources in another way than simply adding people to your workforce. A third source of resources is external counsel. It is very much needed if you think from a management point of view. It is very much needed that you acknowledge that it doesn't make sense. It simply doesn't make sense to try and know everything. Let me give you an example. In the past couple of years, we've seen an increasing importance attached to data protection law. And we've seen the entry into force in Europe of the GDPR. That's maybe an acronym that most of you are familiar with. Well, GDPR is fine. I mean, as a European company, we have our headquarters in Belgium. It is possible for us to check whether GDPR, what's in there and how we can implement it and make sure that there is compliance. But then we hear about data protection legislation being approved in Japan, and then about it being approved in China or in Brazil. And then it really becomes a challenge, because you simply cannot, with Belgian law trained people, you cannot have the confidence that you will be able to also expand your compliance program on data protection with all of these national legislations. So those are the moments where you have to acknowledge that now it's time and it's wise to go and seek outside help. And those outside helpers will be key into helping you build the staff team that you need, that can tackle all of the questions that come your way. So first point, when building a team, make sure you think of more than just individuals and adding individuals to the team. Second thing, There's a whole lot of things that the members in your staff team will know nothing about. And we work within the company, we are a minority. As legal people, um, we are very much not what the typical profile is for someone who works at Materialize. Those people will typically be engineers, um, computer and software experts, people who have a hard skills, technical background. Those are the vast majority of our workforce. That means that there is an enormous gap in the knowledge that we have versus all of the things that these engineers know. Now, that is sometimes very annoying because you can sit in meetings and try and add value while sitting in a meeting feeling desperate and feeling insecure because there's a whole part of the conversation that you're simply not following because you have no idea what they're talking about. I think that as a as a team manager, it is important that you try to mentor people in your team in such a way that they see the flip side more than the simple fact that they don't understand what is being talked about. The flip side is there is the bliss of ignorance. They don't know. Well, that gives you a unique perspective to following the conversation. First, it gives you a position where you can very honestly say and admit that you have no idea what you're talking about, but that will give you a tool to force your colleagues into reducing the level of complexity to what they're talking about so that you can understand. And a way to do that is saying, act as if I were your grandmother and explain to me what you're talking about because I have no idea. And the reason you want to push that and the reason you want to encourage your staff team members to do that is because they need to understand the essence of what is being talked about in order to do their work in a meaningful way. And that is true for legal people when they have to write an agreement. That is also true for, say, people in an HR department when they have to get started on filling a certain vacancy, because you really need to understand what the profile is of the person we're looking for. And I think that that is equally true um, for many other staff department people. A bit linked to that is that you will be looking for people who are not shying away and becoming very silent and very withdrawn whenever I apologize for the pop-up whenever they don't know the topic of what is being discussed during a meeting. At the same time, you want them to have the audacity to ask questions. So, in selecting people to join your team, but also in growing the people who are in your team, you will focus on the importance of curiosity. You will be looking for, of course, if I'm looking for a lawyer, I will select on whether these people do or do not have a law degree. And if they should have a law degree. For me, that is clear cut. That is 100% true. But if I then need to think about what is the following criterion that I will use in my selection process, I will attach less importance to whether they have impressively high degrees at university. I will be looking for signs of these persons to be curious. Are they by Is their individual personality one where they are eager to learn stuff, and not only the stuff that is within their field of study, that is within their comfort zone, but how comfortable are these people and how eager are they to learn about things that they lack a basic background of? Because that is going to be so important, because if they're not curious, if they are not eager to also embrace this entire field of technology that they know nothing about, then how will they be able to speak up when they are in these meetings with colleagues, when they are preparing for conversations with the outside world, and in two, then asking the questions that really matter and are really essential for them to being able to do what they're supposed to be doing. So curiosity is key. Another element that I want to discuss is how important it is for people to build a network. And the network is one that should be beyond the boundaries of the staff team that they're working in. One of the big disadvantages for me in the whole pandemic situation has been that I've lost the incredible benefits of going to, well, having to take a walk to the coffee machine and spend some time there, meeting people casually, informally, and asking them, how are you doing? Hey, you asked me a question about such and such project 2, 3 weeks ago. How's that going? Have you made any progress? Were you able to make progress with the advice that you've given to me? And the problems that you signaled me on such and such a project, have you been able to resolve them? It is so important that we have these type of meetings, and in order to have those encounters, you need to be able who is walking around in your company and who the people are who are working on which spots. You need to understand what the biggest challenges are, what the biggest projects plans and future plans are for the people who work in your R&D department, in your sales department, but also in your operations department, because otherwise how are they going to know that they might need your help, or it might be useful for them to reach out to you and ask you for your help? And it's not always easy. It was much easier when for me when I joined. Materialize was very small, so everybody knew everybody. Now with the growth of the company, that has become more challenging, and it is even more challenging since the start of the pandemic, because these informal and coincidental encounters no longer exist and no longer occur. A way of helping your team members to do that, if you are the team manager, is by giving them assignments where they will be forced to do many outreaches throughout the entire company. That is something I've learned. So building a network. Another thing, and this is one suggestion that was given to me and to the other staff unit managers by our CEO, by Fried van Kraan, years ago, and it still works. A staff team is always going to be one that will have to balance between two key underlying assignments. And that is, on the one hand, to help stimulate the progress of the company, and on the other hand, making sure that the core of the company is preserved. If I apply this to the legal environment and to our work within the legal department, of course, our assignment and our mission is to stimulate the progress, making sure that the business thrives, and that all of the technologies, all of the solutions, the software, the hardware, the parts, you name it, the services that Materialize makes available to the outside markets grows and grows in a sustainable way. But that growth needs to be a careful growth. It needs to be one that does not jeopardize the core of Materialize. And I mean, the core of Materialize is know-how. It is what is in the heads of our people. So anything that comes to that relates to the intellectual property of the company is going to be very important to be protected against the risk of potential inadvertent disclosure, that is protected against the risk of being taken away by people who should not be taking it away and using it for their own benefit. And if you think about that, that means that in our stimulation of progress, we will sometimes have to pull out our red flag and say no to certain things. And that's not easy, right? Because again, here comes the ignorance that plays a role. That will sometimes be a no that is based not so much on the content of the technology and on the technical side of things. That is going to be a no that is based on a risk evaluation that we will be making merely on the basis of our legal background, which is also an unknown world for the engineer. And that means that sometimes you will be confronted with well, people who are a bit unhappy because you've said no, and the only thing they want to do is close their deal because it seems so exciting. And they don't understand why you are, from your perceived ivory legal tower, why you are saying no to that deal. So you have to be very careful in when or when not to say no, but you should not shy away from it if you feel that from your mission to preserve the core, to protect the company against risks, that there might be a reason for not doing it. A following thing is the mantra that we're all in sales. When I talked earlier about the importance of sometimes having to say no and not being afraid to do that, the answer you will sometimes receive is that, well, but you're not in sales. You don't understand. You don't understand all of the challenges that I'm facing and my heavy need for closing this deal because you're not in sales. I think that that is a false contradiction. I think that any employee who works for a company, whether they are in the business and whether they're a sales profile or whether they are doing an entirely different job, such as being a part of a legal team, we're all in sales. Our interest is very much aligned with the interests of the salespeople. We all want to grow the turnover, if only for the very basic motivation that we want our salaries to be paid. But there's so much more to it than just that salary. We want the business to thrive. But from our perspective, from the perspective of the staff department, that will sometimes mean that in order to preserve the quality of the sales, we have to refuse some. eh? If the accumulation of risks that are being incurred in closing a certain deal amount to a level that is simply too high, it will be the right decision to block that sale. And that is because we're all in sales. That is because we don't want people to spend time into a sales project, into a partnership arrangement that might potentially cost a lot more money. eh? Because you need to defend against legal risks that you have seen and that materialize, and therefore there's a whole expensive litigation that comes from that. That is what you don't want, and that means sometimes that you will have to block a certain sale. So again, eh, do not refrain from sometimes eh, giving pushback on the statement that you don't understand because you're not in sales. It's not true. We're all in sales. In order to be able to say that with a decent level of authority, remember when I talked earlier about the importance of building a network and gaining familiarity with what's going on in the business, that helps. People will be less inclined to tell you that you don't understand if they know and if they feel and if you can show that you are very well aware of what their big challenges are, that you're very well aware of which projects in the previous year have gone good, which projects were more difficult. And if also from the position that you have, which is a bit of a distant perspective, if you can say, I know that that is what you're trying to do, but I have also seen in another business unit or in another product line that something similar has happened. And what we've seen there is risks A, B, and C. How can we work together to make sure that that risk is controlled when you venture in this new project that you're thinking about? So, in that sense, the different points that I'm mentioning here are very much reinforcing each other. The last thing I want to talk about is the importance for, as a team manager, the importance of consciously building a career path. What you see here is the Greek letter psi, and this is a tool that we use within the company to develop career paths for people, where people start at the bottom in a very general job and then can grow into different directions. Their direction of growth can be into sales. Their direction of growth can also be into a more deep technical level, or they can grow to a management level. And then several combinations are possible. Now, of course, to say that legal people or staff members are going to be growing in a technical level is a bit harsh, because it's not it's not obvious, right? Having them grow in a sales role is also not very obvious, and having them grow in a management role, well, for a staff unit you can in principle only have one manager. So that may give you the false impression that career paths for staff department members are difficult to draw out. They're not. eh? They're not. And there is, of course, not one solution that where I can say any member of your staff department is going to grow into this type of a professional. But it's not because it's not easy that you shouldn't be thinking about it, that you shouldn't explore together with your people and together with the people in the business that they work with what their intrinsic qualities are. Because there are legal people, or there are finance and HR people who have a big affinity with business projects and with business contracts. Likewise, there are people in an IT service department that might have an affinity and an ambition and a drive and an eagerness to learn about the technology of what the company is doing. So there is possibilities, but what it requires from the manager of the team is a very open and a very conscious thinking about it and working on it together with the individual team member. And
Sorry
that's
to
what I wanted to share. Yeah,
Oh,
but I'm done.
perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. I was just going to say it's time for
Yes.
questions. I see a few. There's one which is there any specific time scenario you wish you could have hired more people instead of using automation?
No, the other way around. There was a time when I wish I had considered less finding a solution for the challenges we had in the team, less relying on expanding the workforce and more forcing us to rethink the way in which we were doing things, and trying to find automation to some of the processes that we were doing.
Okay. And then the last question is what are the challenges for non-techie people working with engineers and technicians?
I'm sorry, what are the challenges for non-techie people? The challenges?
Non-techie people. Yep.
Well, I've tried to describe them. From a very personal perspective, for me, when I started working at the company, it was very much feeling isolated, in not knowing everything I didn't know. And then the key into finding piercing through that perceived problem of lack of ignorance was finding my buddies. I kind of I identified in the workforce two or three people that had really the ability to explain things in an easy and an understandable way. And when I find those buddies, I had one for software and one for hardware, then it became a lot easier because I could go to them firstly, and then get some basic introduction into what I didn't know, and then talk to the person that I had to talk to, with a lesser degree of the ignorance, which made the conversation less difficult.
Okay. And with that, we are at the end. Thank you so much, Carla, for sharing. It was a great presentation.